Elias Vance looked at the woman across from him, a woman he had once believed he would spend his life with, and prepared to detonate the delicate, gilded cage of their shared existence. The afternoon sun, filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse apartment, cast long shadows across the Italian marble floor, making the room feel like a grand, empty stage. Serafina was examining her manicure, her brow furrowed in concentration, as if the integrity of her nail polish were a matter of global importance. She hadn't truly looked at him, not really, in months. She saw the reflection of her own desires, the provider of a lifestyle, the architect of her comfort. She did not see the man. Today, he would find out if there was a man left for her to see. He cleared his throat. The sound was small in the cavernous living room, but it was enough. Serafina's head lifted, a flicker of annoyance in her crystalline blue eyes. "Elias, darling, don't do that. You know it sounds like a death rattle." He ignored the casual cruelty, the little verbal pinprick she was so adept at delivering. He had cataloged them all. "Serafina, we need to talk." "We're always talking," she sighed, finally setting her hand down and giving him her partial attention. "If it's about the caterer for the Hamptons party, I've handled it. It's all settled." "It's not about the party," he said, his voice level, betraying none of the corrosive acid churning in his gut. He had rehearsed this. He had run the lines in his head 1,000 times, playing out every possible response, every branching path of the conversation. He was a financial analyst by trade, a man who lived and breathed probabilities and projections. This conversation was the most important projection of his life. "There's a problem, a serious one, with my investments." That got her attention. Her spine straightened. The vague disinterest vanished, replaced by a sharp, focused avarice he knew all too well. It was the same look she got when she saw a diamond necklace in a jeweler's window. "A problem? What sort of problem?" He leaned forward, lacing his fingers together on the glass coffee table. He made his expression grave, letting his shoulders slump just so. It was a performance, but the exhaustion behind it was real. He was tired of the artifice, of the constant, silent evaluation he was subjected to. "It's complicated. A regulatory freeze. My main fund, the one that generates most of our liquid income, it's been locked, indefinitely." He chose the words with care. Freeze, locked, indefinitely. They were words of powerlessness, of sudden, catastrophic loss of control. Serafina stared at him, her perfectly sculpted lips parting slightly. He could see the calculations whirring behind her eyes, the mental abacus clicking away as she tabulated the potential damage to her own life. She wasn't processing his stress, his feigned fear. She was assessing her own exposure. "Locked? What does that mean, locked? You mean we can't get to it?" "Not for the foreseeable future," Elias said, letting a note of weary defeat enter his voice. "It could be months. It could be longer. The lawyers are involved, but it's a mess. For now, the income stream is gone. We'll have to make some significant cutbacks, drastic ones." He watched her face, waiting. This was the moment. This was the precipice. Would she reach across the table and take his hand? Would she say, "Elias, we'll get through this together. It doesn't matter"? Would she show a single shred of the partnership they had claimed to have for the past 3 years? The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The only sound was the distant hum of the city 20 stories below. Serafina's gaze drifted away from him, towards the window, towards the life of glittering ease that was now, in her mind, under threat. Her expression hardened, the soft concern of a partner replaced by the flinty edge of a creditor. She turned back to him, her eyes cold and clear. She did not ask if he was okay. She did not ask what she could do to help. She did not offer a word of comfort or solidarity. Her first words, uttered with an unnerving, almost petulant calmness, landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. "But what about my allowance?" Elias felt something inside him, a final, fragile thread of hope, snap cleanly in two. It was done. The test was complete, the results logged and verified. He had his answer. He kept his face a mask of weary disappointment, but inside, a strange, cold calm began to spread through him. It was the calm of certainty, the calm of a decision finally, irrevocably made. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw a stranger. A beautiful, exquisitely dressed stranger who had just revealed the barren landscape of her heart. The allowance, he repeated softly, as if tasting the word. Of course, that will have to stop. Immediately. There is no money for it, Serafina. Her face contorted into a mask of disbelief and outrage. Stop! Elias, you can't be serious. My trainer, my stylist, my charity commitments, my car payment. How am I supposed to manage? He had wondered in the darkest hours of his planning if he was being too harsh, too cynical. He had wondered if he was misjudging her, if 3 years of a relationship deserved the benefit of the doubt. In that one brutally selfish question, she had vaporized every last gram of his doubt. She had confirmed his worst fears, and in doing so, had given him the only gift she had left to give: freedom from illusion. He thought she loved him. She didn't. She loved what he provided, and within a few short weeks, he would show her, and her arrogant family, exactly what she had just thrown away. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever wondered what it would be like to hold all the cards while everyone else thinks you're bankrupt, then you're going to love what happens next. We see stories like this play out all the time, but this one is special. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, because this is a journey of vindication we can all take together. Stick with us because the fallout from this moment is only just beginning. The phone call was made before Elias had even left the room. He heard Serafina's sharp, panicked tones from the bedroom, the words disaster, cut off, and useless slicing through the heavy silence of the apartment. She wasn't calling a friend for support. She wasn't calling a financial advisor for a second opinion. She was calling her father. Of course she was. Marcus Hayes was the sun around which the entire Hayes family solar system revolved. A man whose gravitational pull of wealth and ego warped everything around him. An hour later, Elias's phone buzzed with a summons. Not a request, a summons. A text from Serafina. My parents' house, 7 p.m. We need to discuss your situation. Elias looked at the message, a grim smile touching his lips. It was already his situation, not our situation. The lines had been drawn with breathtaking speed. He typed back a simple, okay, and slipped the phone into his pocket. His fingers brushed against a small, reassuring shape, a slim, leather-bound notebook, no bigger than his palm. It was worn at the edges, the dark brown leather softened with years of use. To anyone else, it would look like a simple address book or a personal journal. To Elias, it was the repository of his real life, the silent, unassailable truth of his empire. Inside, in his own precise, coded script, were the details of his actual portfolio, a sprawling, diversified collection of assets so vast it would make Marcus Hayes's respectable fortune look like a rounding error. He touched the worn leather, a small grounding ritual. Patience, strategy, observation. These were the pillars of his success, and they would be the pillars of his liberation. He arrived at the Hayes mansion in Belmont precisely at 7. The house was a monument to new money, a sprawling Georgian replica that screamed its own expense. Each column, each perfectly manicured hedge, was designed to intimidate. It had always made Elias feel like an actor on a set, playing the part of the suitable beau. Tonight, he was playing a different role, the supplicant. Marcus and Eleanor Hayes were waiting for him in the formal living room, a space so pristine it looked as though no one had ever actually lived in it. Serafina sat between them on a silk brocade sofa, her posture rigid, her face a mask of tragic victimhood. Marcus stood by the unlit fireplace, a thick, crystal tumbler of scotch in his hand. He was a bull of a man, with a florid face and an air of absolute, unshakable self-importance. Elias, he began without any preamble or greeting. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. Serafina has told me about your unfortunate difficulties. The word difficulties was delivered with a tone of profound condescension, as if Elias had failed a simple arithmetic test. It's a temporary market fluctuation, Marcus, Elias replied, keeping his voice calm and even. He remained standing, refusing to take the offered armchair that would have placed him physically lower than the rest of them. Temporary? Indefinite? These are words for men who have lost control, Marcus scoffed. He took a sip of his scotch, his eyes narrowing. I'll be blunt, son. I never thought you had the killer instinct. Too quiet. Too much time with your head in the books and not enough in the real world. I run a business, a real one, with concrete and steel, not numbers on a screen. And in my world, when a man fails, he admits it. The air crackled with hostility. Eleanor, a woman who had faded into a pale echo of her husband's personality, wrung her hands. Marcus, dear. No, Eleanor, this needs to be said. Marcus steamrolled on, turning his full attention to Elias. My daughter is accustomed to a certain standard of living, a standard you committed to providing. You have failed in that commitment. I committed to a partnership, Elias corrected him softly. Partnerships are tested by adversity. Don't give me philosophical nonsense. Marcus's voice rose, his face growing redder. This is about practicalities. Serafina cannot be expected to suffer because of your incompetence. He set his glass down with a heavy thud. However, I am a generous man, and you are, for the moment, attached to my daughter. I have an opening in my company's logistics department, warehouse management. It's not glamorous, but it's a steady paycheck. It would show you have some character, some willingness to do what it takes to provide for my little girl. The offer hung in the air, grotesque and insulting. It was a power play designed to humiliate him, to reduce him from a peer to a lowly employee. Serafina looked at him, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and expectation. She actually expected him to consider it, to swallow his pride and accept a handout from her father so he could continue to fund her lifestyle. Elias met Marcus's gaze without flinching. Inside, he felt a cold, hard anger solidifying into resolve. This was better than he could have planned. They were handing him the very justification he needed, writing the script for their own downfall. Thank you for the offer, Marcus, Elias said, his voice a quiet counterpoint to Marcus's bluster. It's very generous, but I'll have to decline. My situation is complex, but it is my own. I will handle it myself. Marcus stared at him, dumbfounded by his refusal. You'll handle it? You'll handle it by letting my daughter's life fall apart? That's pride, son. Foolish, misplaced pride, and it will cost you. Mark my words. I will, Elias said, the two words carrying a double meaning only he understood. He turned his gaze to Serafina. She looked away, refusing to meet his eyes. She was ashamed, not of her father's cruelty, but of Elias's refusal to submit to it. In her world, you took the deal. You bowed to power. His quiet dignity was, to her, another form of failure. I think I should go, Elias said into the tense silence. It's clear I've taken up enough of your time. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving the three of them in his wake. He didn't look back. He could feel their eyes on him, their collective judgment of physical weight. But as the heavy front door clicked shut behind him, the weight lifted. He was no longer playing a part. The test was over, and the next phase, the strategic dismantling of their arrogant world, had just begun. He got into his modest 4-year-old sedan, a car they had often mocked, and drove away from the garish mansion, a quiet sense of purpose settling over him like a cloak. They thought he was drowning. They had no idea he was the one controlling the tide. The days that followed were a masterclass in passive aggression and emotional attrition. The first and most immediate change was financial. The generous 5-figure allowance that Elias had deposited into Serafina's personal account on the first of every month simply stopped. Along with it, the automatic payments for her leased convertible, her exclusive gym membership, her bi-weekly sessions with a celebrity stylist, and the half-dozen subscription boxes that arrived like clockwork, filled with artisanal coffees and designer skincare products. The silence from the banking system was louder than any argument. For the first week, Serafina said nothing. She floated through their apartment like a ghost, her silences layered with accusation. She would leave credit card statements on the kitchen island, circled in red pen where a payment was past due. She would sigh dramatically while scrolling through her phone, angling the screen just enough for Elias to see photos of her friends on yachts, in the Mediterranean, or at charity galas he could no longer afford. Elias, for his part, played the role of the beleaguered provider perfectly. He adopted a new, frugal routine. He stopped ordering from their favorite upscale restaurants and began cooking simple meals, pastas, roasted chicken, salads. He presented them with a quiet pride that only seemed to infuriate Serafina more. "What is this?" she asked one evening, staring down at a plate of spaghetti with a simple, homemade tomato sauce. "It's dinner," Elias said, taking a bite. "It's actually pretty good." "It's peasant food, Elias," she said, pushing the plate away. "I have a palate. I can't just switch to this." She gestured at the plate as if it were a biohazard. That night, she ordered a $500 sushi platter and had it delivered, paying for it with a credit card he knew was nearing its limit. She ate it alone in the bedroom, leaving the empty containers for him to find in the morning. To maintain the illusion of his financial collapse, Elias began a careful, controlled liquidation of some of his smaller, more visible assets. He sold a collection of expensive watches he never wore, telling Serafina the money was needed for lawyers' retainers. He sold his golf club membership, claiming he didn't have the time for it anymore, while he focused on his problem. Each sale was a small, public performance of his decline, and each one was reported back to Marcus and Eleanor with morbid glee. Eleanor called him under the guise of offering support. "Elias, dear," she began, her voice dripping with insincere sympathy. "Serafina is so worried. We all are. I just hope you're not letting your pride get in the way of making practical decisions. Marcus's offer still stands, you know. There's no shame in accepting help when you're in over your head." "I appreciate the concern, Eleanor," Elias said, his voice a study in polite deflection. "But as I told Marcus, I have it under control." "Do you, dear?" she pressed, her tone sharpening. "Because from where we're sitting, it looks like you're dragging our daughter down with you. A man's job is to provide. If he can't do that, he should at least have the decency to step aside." The message was clear. If you can't pay, get out of the way. It was the Hayes family ethos, stripped of all its polite veneer. He hung up the phone, the quiet hum of the dial tone a welcome relief. He walked over to his desk, which was piled with what looked like legal documents and financial statements in disarray. It was a carefully constructed stage. Hidden beneath a folder of intimidating but meaningless legal jargon was his small leather notebook. He opened it. The pages were filled with his neat, precise handwriting. It was not a journal of feelings, but a log of actions. He wasn't just weathering their storm of contempt. He was actively managing a far more significant and secret portfolio. He made a note. Liquidate Apex Holdings. Reroute capital to Project Nightingale. Phase 2. Project Nightingale was his code name for the systematic acquisition of the commercial debt belonging to Hayes Corp's primary lender. While they were busy critiquing his choice of pasta, he was quietly, methodically buying the chains that held their empire together. He spent his days in the small home office, the door closed. Serafina assumed he was on the phone with lawyers, begging for a reprieve. In reality, he was on secure lines with his real team, a small, elite group of analysts and attorneys who knew him not as Serafina Hayes' struggling boyfriend, but as the enigmatic and ferociously successful founder of Vance Strategic Holdings. He was a ghost in the financial world, a man who valued privacy above all else, his name intentionally kept off public documents and mastheads. His anonymity, once a personal preference, had now become his greatest strategic weapon. One afternoon, Serafina stormed into the office without knocking. "I can't do this anymore, Elias," she announced, throwing a stack of mail onto his desk. "This is a final notice for my car. They're going to repossess it. My friends are all planning a trip to Aspen for a ski weekend, and I have to tell them I can't go because my boyfriend has suddenly become a pauper. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" Elias looked at her, at the genuine anguish on her face. But it was the anguish of a spoiled child whose favorite toy had been taken away, not the shared pain of a partner in a crisis. He felt a profound sense of pity for her, a pity that was entirely devoid of love. "I know this is difficult, Serafina," he said, his voice gentle. "Difficult?" She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "It's impossible. This isn't the life I signed up for." "No," he agreed, looking directly into her eyes. "I'm beginning to realize it isn't." He picked up the final notice for her car. He would pay it, of course. He would pay all the bills. He would keep the lights on and food in the fridge. He would be the responsible adult in the room, quietly managing the controlled demolition of their life together, all while building the foundation of his own. He was allowing her to accumulate a debt of a different kind, a moral debt, an emotional debt, and the time for repayment was drawing ever closer. The invitation arrived via courier, a thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with the golden crest of the Hayes Family Foundation. It was for the foundation's annual Starlight Gala, the crown jewel of the city's social calendar. It was an event Elias and Serafina had attended for the past 2 years, a night of performative philanthropy, overpriced champagne, and relentless social climbing. Tucked inside with the invitation was a handwritten note from Marcus on his personal stationery. "Serafina and Elias," it read, the ink bleeding slightly from the pressure of his pen. "I know things are tight for you right now, so consider these tickets a gift. It's important for Serafina to keep up appearances, and for you to show your face and let people know you haven't simply disappeared. A man who hides looks guilty." The note was a masterpiece of condescension, a charitable act weaponized into an assertion of dominance. It was both a command and an insult. Elias read it, and a slow, cold anger burned within him. This was the moment he had been waiting for. A public stage for his public humiliation. He would not have designed it better himself. "We have to go," Serafina said, her voice holding a note of desperate excitement. For the first time in weeks, a spark of her old self returned. The gala was her natural habitat. "Daddy's right. We can't just hide away. People will talk." "They're already talking, Serafina," Elias said quietly. "Well, this is our chance to manage the narrative," she insisted, missing his point entirely. "We'll go. We'll smile. I'll wear the blue dress from last year. God, how mortifying. And we'll just get through it. It's better than sitting here eating pasta." The night of the gala was as awful as Elias had anticipated, and yet so much more instructive. He wore his best suit, a classic, impeccably tailored Tom Ford that he had owned for years. It was the kind of suit that whispered wealth, not shouted it. But next to Serafina, who was indeed wearing a dress he recognized from a previous season, the effect was muted. She carried herself with a kind of brittle defiance, a woman bracing for judgment. The moment they stepped into the ballroom of the city's most expensive hotel, the temperature seemed to drop. Marcus Hayes, holding court near the entrance, spotted them immediately. He strode over, clapping Elias on the shoulder with a theatrical, pitying heartiness. "Elias, glad you could make it, son," he boomed, his voice loud enough for everyone in their immediate vicinity to hear. "Takes guts to show your face when you're taking a beating in the market. Guts!" He then turned to the small cluster of business magnates and their wives, who were hanging on his every word. "Everyone, you know my daughter, Serafina, and this is her young man, Elias Vance. He's having a bit of a rough patch at the moment, but we're taking care of him. Aren't we, son? Elias felt the gazes of a dozen powerful people fall upon him. He saw pity in some, a cold, predatory curiosity in others. These were people he knew, professionally at least. He had sat in boardrooms with some of them, negotiated against others. They knew him as a sharp, discreet analyst from a boutique firm. Now they were seeing him through Marcus Hayes's lens. A charity case, a failed provider, a boy playing in a man's world. He simply smiled, a calm, neutral expression. Marcus is very generous, he said, the words polite but carrying a subtle, icy undertone that only he could appreciate. Serafina, mortified, quickly pulled him away. Could he have been any louder? She hissed, her cheeks flushed with shame. Now everyone knows. For the rest of the evening, Serafina became an anchor, dragging him through a sea of polite condolences and thinly veiled questions. So, Elias, what are you into these days? One of Marcus's cronies asked, a smirk playing on his lips. Heard the market's been tough on you smaller players. Serafina would jump in, offering vague platitudes. Elias is just restructuring. It's a strategic pivot. Her attempts to spin the situation only made it sound more desperate. The humiliation was relentless and systematic. Serafina eventually abandoned him, seeking refuge in a circle of her friends, their laughter and bright chatter a world away from the shadows where Elias now stood. He watched her from across the vast, glittering ballroom. She was animated, laughing, her hand on the arm of a young real estate heir named Tristan. She looked relieved, as if she had finally shed a heavy weight, the weight of him. Elias, left to his own devices, did not shrink into a corner. He accepted a glass of water from a passing waiter and stood near a large marble column, observing. He was not just an object of pity, he was an intelligence operative behind enemy lines. He listened to the conversations around him. He noted the alliances, the boasts, the whispers of deals and vulnerabilities. He saw the entire ecosystem of wealth and power, and he saw it with a clarity he had never had before. When you are perceived as a threat, people are guarded. When you are perceived as a failure, they become careless. They reveal themselves. His hand went to his pocket, his fingers finding the familiar shape of his leather notebook. He didn't take it out, but he could feel its solid presence. He thought of the entries within, the lines of code that represented stock acquisitions, debt instruments, holding companies. The men in this room preened and postured, displaying their wealth like a peacock's tail. His own power was invisible, silent, and 1,000 times more lethal. A man he vaguely recognized, a senior partner from a rival investment bank, approached him. The man's name was Peterson. Vance, Peterson said, his tone one of genuine confusion. I was surprised to see you here. I heard you'd run into some trouble. You hear a lot of things at parties, Peterson, Elias replied smoothly. Peterson leaned in, lowering his voice. Look, I know we've competed for a few deals, but I always respected your mind. If you're looking for a position, our firm is always looking for talent. I could make a call. It was a genuine offer, not a power play like Marcus's. It was a lifeline from a peer who saw a capable man in a bad spot. For a fleeting moment, Elias felt a pang of something other than cold resolve. I appreciate that, Peterson. Sincerely, Elias said, meeting the man's gaze. But I think I'll be fine. Peterson shrugged, confused by his placid confidence. All right, suit yourself. He walked away, shaking his head. Elias watched him go. The public humiliation was complete. He had been pitied, mocked, and dismissed by the very people he would soon have the power to ruin. He had seen his partner abandon him for the comfort of a wealthier crowd. He had endured it all with a quiet, unnerving calm. The fire had been lit, the foundations had been tested, and now all that was left was to watch the edifice of their arrogance burn. The turning point, the catalyst for the final act, came from the mouth of Marcus Hayes himself. Halfway through the gala, after the salads had been cleared and the main course served, Marcus took to the stage to make the keynote address. He stood at the podium, bathed in a warm spotlight, the very picture of success and magnanimity. "Friends, colleagues, pillars of our great community," he began, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "Tonight we celebrate not just what we have given, but what we are building." He spoke for several minutes about the foundation's charitable works, but it was all a preamble. The real purpose of the speech was to aggrandize himself and his company. "As many of you know," he continued, his chest puffing out, "Hayes Corp is on the verge of its most ambitious project to date, the Meridian Plaza, a development that will redefine our city's skyline and create thousands of jobs." A polite ripple of applause went through the room. A project of this magnitude requires vision, it requires steel, and it requires capital of a different order, Marcus boomed. "And that is why I am thrilled tonight to unofficially announce our partnership with one of the most formidable and frankly mysterious investment firms in the world. A firm whose backing ensures the Meridian Plaza will not just be a dream, but a towering reality." He paused for dramatic effect, sweeping his gaze across the rapt audience. Elias leaned forward slightly, his entire body thrumming with a sudden, intense focus. He knew what was coming. "I'm talking," Marcus declared, "about Vance Strategic Holdings." The name landed in the room with a quiet thud of impact. There were murmurs. Vance Strategic Holdings, or VSH, was a legend in the upper echelons of finance. They were known for their aggressive, impossibly successful plays, their uncanny ability to see market shifts months in advance, and their absolute, ironclad secrecy. No one knew who was behind it. The firm had no public face, no charismatic CEO giving interviews. It was a ghost, a black box of immense financial power. From across the room, Elias saw Serafina look at him, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. The name, Vance, the same as his. It was a coincidence, surely, but a strange one. He saw the thought form and then be dismissed from her mind. It was too absurd, too impossible. The man she had left standing by a column, the man who couldn't pay for her car, could not possibly be connected to such a powerhouse. Marcus was glowing, soaking in the reflected glory of his new, powerful partner. "We have our final meeting next week to sign the papers and formalize the deal," he announced. "It will be the single largest capital infusion in the history of my company, a true partnership of titans." Elias sat back in his chair, a ghost of a smile on his lips. It was perfect. The dramatic irony was so thick, so potent, it was almost comical. Marcus Hayes was boasting to a room full of the city's elite about his partnership with the very man he had just publicly humiliated. He was celebrating a deal that would be sealed with a man he had offered a job managing a warehouse. The rest of the gala passed in a blur for Elias. He had the key piece of information he needed. He now knew the exact timeline, the final meeting, the signing, the moment when all the threads he had been carefully weaving would be pulled tight. The next morning, while Serafina slept off a champagne headache, Elias was in his home office. The door was locked. The carefully arranged piles of legal trouble had been swept aside. On his desk was a secure, encrypted laptop and a satellite phone. He was no longer playing a role. He was at work. His first call was to Julian Croft. Julian was more than just his lawyer. He was his oldest friend and the public-facing managing director of Vance Strategic Holdings. He was the buffer, the respectable face that insulated Elias from the world. "Julian," Elias said, his voice crisp and authoritative. The weary, defeated tone he had used for weeks was gone. "It's time. Activate Project Nightingale, Phase 3. I want full leverage on the Hayes Corp debt portfolio by Wednesday at noon. And I want you to clear my schedule for Friday morning. I'll be attending the Meridian Plaza signing personally." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, then Julian's low chuckle. "Attending personally? Elias, you haven't shown your face at a signing in 5 years. Are you sure?" Marcus Hayes won't know what hit him. He'll know exactly what hit him, Elias replied, his voice cold as ice. That's the point. I'll be there to deliver the message myself, make the arrangements. He spent the next several hours on the phone, issuing a rapid-fire series of commands to his team. He moved vast, invisible rivers of capital with a few quiet words. He was like a chess grandmaster, seeing the entire board, positioning his pieces for the final, devastating checkmate. He was dismantling one reality and constructing another, all from the quiet solitude of a room where his partner believed he was stewing in failure. When he finally emerged from the office late in the afternoon, he looked drained. The performance was back on. He found Serafina in the living room, flipping through a fashion magazine with a sullen expression. "Hear about your father's big deal," Elias said, his tone neutral. "Vance Strategic Holdings. Impressive." Serafina looked up, a flicker of interest in her eyes. "It is, isn't it? Daddy is a genius. He always lands on his feet. He partners with winners." The implication was clear, hanging in the air between them like a poisoned dart. "Unlike you." "Yes," Elias said, looking out the window at the city skyline that Marcus Hayes dreamed of conquering. "He certainly does." He felt the leather notebook in his pocket. Inside, on the last page, he had written a single, final entry. Hayes Corp., final assessment, unsentimental liquidation. The time for observation was over. The time for action had arrived. The ultimatum came on a Tuesday. It was a gray, drizzly evening, the city lights blurred and distorted through the rain-streaked windows of the penthouse. The atmosphere in the apartment had become almost unbreathable, thick with unspoken resentment and disappointment. Elias was in the kitchen, washing the dishes from the simple meal he had made, and Serafina had refused to eat when she walked in. She wasn't wearing one of her usual silk loungewear sets. She was dressed to go out, in a sharp black dress and heels. Her makeup was perfect, her hair styled. It was armor. "Elias, we need to end this," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She didn't look at him, focusing instead on a point somewhere over his shoulder. Elias turned off the water and dried his hands, giving her his full attention. He remained silent, letting her speak. He knew this was a rehearsed speech, a final declaration. "I've been patient," she began, a statement so patently false it was almost laughable. "I have tried to be supportive, but this is not a life. It's a waiting room for a failure that's already happened. I'm young. I have options. I will not have my future dragged down by your past." "My past?" Elias asked, his voice quiet. "Your failure," she snapped, her composure cracking for a moment. "Your inability to hold on to what you had. My father was right. You don't have the killer instinct. You just gave up." She took a deep breath, regaining her icy calm. "I've been seeing someone. You might have noticed him at the gala. Tristan Allister. His father is a partner in the Meridian Plaza deal. He's a man with a future, a real future." Elias felt nothing. No jealousy, no pain, only a distant, clinical sense of confirmation. It was as he had projected. In the face of adversity, she had not sought to build, but to escape. She had found a new host. "Tristan has asked me to accompany him to a business dinner tonight," she continued, "and then to a weekend in Paris. He understands what a woman like me requires." She finally looked at him, her eyes cold and hard as diamonds. "I am giving you 1 week, Elias. 1 week to get a call from your lawyers, to have some news, to show me that you have a plan to fix this disaster you've created. If by next Tuesday you are still this diminished man, then I am leaving. I will move my things out and we will be done. For good." She stood there, proud and defiant, as if she were offering him a great mercy, a final chance to win her back. The dramatic irony was staggering. She thought she was delivering a death sentence to their relationship. He knew she was merely reading the date on a demolition order that had already been signed. The deadline she had given him was next Tuesday. The signing with Hayes Corp was this Friday. Elias looked at her, at this beautiful, hollow woman and felt a profound wave of relief. She had removed the last shred of any lingering, sentimental obligation he might have felt. She had made the coming confrontation clean, simple, and utterly necessary. 1 week, he repeated softly. He let a flicker of what she would interpret as desperation cross his face. Serafina, is that really all the time our 3 years together is worth? The appeal to their shared history was a calculated move. One last test. Her response was swift and brutal. 3 years of a certain kind of life, Elias, she corrected him. A life you are no longer able to provide. The terms of our arrangement have changed because you failed to uphold your end. Don't try to make this about sentiment. This is about reality. There it was. Arrangement. Not relationship, not love. Arrangement. It was the most honest thing she had said to him in months. He nodded slowly, letting his shoulders slump in defeat. Okay, Serafina. 1 week, I'll do my best. She gave him a curt, dismissive nod, as if to a servant who had just promised to work harder. I hope you do, for your sake. Without another word, she turned, her heels clicking decisively on the marble floor, and walked out of the apartment, leaving the scent of her expensive perfume in her wake. The door clicked shut behind her. Elias stood alone in the silent kitchen. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. The countdown had begun. He walked over to the window and looked down at the rain-slicked street. He saw Serafina exit the building, a doorman holding an umbrella over her head. A sleek, black Bentley, a car far more expensive than the one he had stopped paying for, purred at the curb. Tristan Allister, handsome and confident, stepped out to open her door. Elias watched them drive away, disappearing into the city's glittering, indifferent night. He felt no anger, no sadness, just the quiet, focused calm of a predator who knows its prey is exactly where it wants it to be. He pulled the small leather notebook from his pocket and drew a firm, black line under his last entry. The assessment was complete. All that remained was the execution. Friday morning was just 3 days away. Friday morning dawned bright and clear, the city washed clean by the week's rain. In the penthouse apartment, an unnerving calm had settled. Serafina had been mostly absent, spending her time with Tristan, making a public show of her new option. She treated Elias with a cool, clinical distance, like a landlord waiting for a tenant's lease to expire. She was confident, smug, believing she had all the power. Elias, meanwhile, had been meticulously preparing, not for a desperate attempt to win her back, but for a corporate execution. He had spent the last 2 days on secure lines, coordinating the final movements of his assets, ensuring every legal document was ironclad, every piece of his strategy locked in place. At 9 a.m., Serafina breezed into the living room, dressed in a sharp, navy blue business dress. I'm heading to my father's office, she announced, checking her reflection in a large mirror. The big signing for the Meridian Plaza is this morning. It's a huge day for the family. I'm sure it is, Elias said from the sofa, where he was reading a newspaper. He was dressed casually, in jeans and a simple gray sweater. She looked at him, a condescending pity in her eyes. You know, Elias, it's not too late. You could call my father. Apologize for your pride. He might still find a place for you after all this. It would show some initiative before your deadline on Tuesday. Elias folded his newspaper and set it aside. Thank you for the advice, Serafina. I'll keep it in mind. Suit yourself, she shrugged, grabbing her purse. I have to go celebrate a real success. She walked out without a backward glance. As soon as the door closed, Elias stood up. His calm demeanor vanished, replaced by a sharp, focused energy. He went into the bedroom and changed into the Tom Ford suit he had worn to the gala. It was his armor, but tonight it was not for defense. He slipped the small leather notebook into his inside pocket. His phone buzzed. A text from Julian Croft. The stage is set. They're all in the main boardroom, waiting for Godot. Elias texted back. Godot is on his way. The Hayes Corporation headquarters was a gleaming tower of glass and steel, a testament to Marcus Hayes's ego. Elias bypassed the main entrance, using a private key card to access a secure elevator that went directly to the executive floor. As he ascended, the city unfolding beneath him, he felt a profound sense of clarity. This wasn't revenge. Revenge was a hot, messy emotion. This was an audit, a correction, a balancing of the scales. The elevator opened silently onto a plushly carpeted lobby. The door to the main boardroom was closed. He could hear the low murmur of expectant conversation from within. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. Then he pushed the door open and walked in. The effect was instantaneous. The conversation stopped. 20 pairs of eyes, belonging to Marcus Hayes, his senior executives, his lawyers, and his family, all turned to him. Marcus, Eleanor, and Serafina were all there, seated at one end of the massive mahogany table. Serafina's face, which had been glowing with triumph, froze into a mask of pure disbelief and horror. Marcus's face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. "What in God's name are you doing here?" he sputtered, rising from his chair. "This is a private meeting. Security! Get him out of here!" Elias didn't stop. He walked calmly, deliberately down the length of the room, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. He ignored the shocked faces, the sputtering executives. His gaze was fixed on the empty leather chair at the head of the table, the chair reserved for the honored guest, the head of Vance Strategic Holdings. "I asked you a question," Marcus roared, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. "Who let you up here?" Just as two burly security guards started to move towards Elias, the boardroom door opened again. Julian Croft walked in, carrying a slim leather briefcase. He was impeccably dressed, his expression serene. "That won't be necessary, gentlemen," Julian said, his calm voice cutting through the tension. The security guard stopped, confused. Julian walked past them and stood beside Elias, who had now reached the head of the table. Julian turned to the bewildered room and smiled politely. "Good morning, everyone. My apologies for the slight delay." He gestured towards Elias. "Marcus, members of the board, allow me to formally introduce the founder, sole principal, and chairman of Vance Strategic Holdings, Mr. Elias Vance." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so profound, so heavy, it felt like the air had been sucked from the room. If a bomb had been detonated, the shock could not have been more total. Serafina's face had gone chalk white. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide with a dawning, catastrophic understanding. She looked from Elias, standing tall and powerful at the head of the table, to Julian, and back again. The name, Vance. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a fact that was now dismantling her entire reality, brick by brick. Marcus Hayes stared, his jaw slack. His mind, so quick to calculate profit and loss, simply could not process the data. The man he had offered a warehouse job to, the man he had called a failure, the man his daughter was in the process of discarding like last season's fashion. That man was the ghost, the legend, the financial titan he had been courting for months. It was impossible. That's a lie," Marcus stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. "This is a joke, a sick joke." Elias slowly pulled the small, worn leather notebook from his pocket and placed it gently on the polished table in front of him. The simple, unassuming object seemed to command the entire room's attention. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked at Serafina. "No joke, Marcus," Elias said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "Just a final accounting." He pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. The quiet scrape of the chair against the floor was the only sound. He was now in his rightful place, and from that seat he held the power to create or destroy, to save or to ruin. And he looked at the family who had scorned him, his expression unreadable, and prepared to read them the final balance of their account. Elias let the silence hang in the room, letting the full weight of the revelation settle upon them. He watched as the gears of understanding ground slowly in Marcus Hayes's mind, as the arrogant bluster drained from his face, replaced by a dawning, sickening dread. He saw Eleanor clutch her husband's arm, her face a pale mask of confusion. And he saw Seraphina. Her shock had curdled into a kind of horrified awe. She was staring at him as if seeing him for the first time, not as the man she was leaving, but as a world of power and wealth she had just casually, stupidly thrown away. Elias opened the small leather notebook. The pages were filled with his neat, coded script, but he didn't need to read from them. He knew the entries by heart. This was not about data anymore. This was about testimony. This was never just about a business deal, Elias began, his voice calm and measured. It was not the voice of anger, but of absolute authority. It was the voice of a judge delivering a verdict. He looked directly at Marcus. On May 12th, in your living room, you called me a failed investment. You told me I lacked a killer instinct and offered me a menial job in your warehouse to teach me about character. You did this in front of your wife and your daughter. He shifted his gaze to Eleanor. On May 22nd, you called me. Under the pretense of offering support, you told me that a man's job is to provide, and if he can't, he should have the decency to step aside. You advised me to let your daughter go. His eyes finally settled on Seraphina, and for the first time she flinched, looking down at the table. At the Starlight Gala on June 8th, Elias continued, his voice relentless, in front of your peers and colleagues, Marcus, you introduced me as a charity case, a man having a rough patch that you were taking care of. You used my feigned misfortune as a prop to make yourself look magnanimous. He paused, letting the memory of that public humiliation fill the room. And Seraphina, he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly, which only made it more devastating. On Tuesday of this week, just 3 days ago, you stood in our kitchen and informed me that our 3-year relationship was, in fact, an arrangement. An arrangement whose terms I had failed to uphold. You gave me a 1-week ultimatum to fix myself before you moved on to a more suitable provider, Tristan Allister, whose primary qualification, it seems, is his father's partnership in this very deal. He leaned forward slightly, his quiet intensity commanding the absolute attention of everyone present. For 6 weeks, I have given you all a test, a simple one. I wanted to see what was left when the money was gone. I wanted to know if the partnership, the love, the family you all claim to value had any substance, any foundation at all, or if it was just a fragile facade built on a bedrock of my net worth. He looked around the table, from one ashen face to the next. The results of that test are in, and they are, I must say, conclusive. You have shown me that your family is a business. Loyalty is transactional. Respect is conditional upon financial performance. And love is just a synonym for lifestyle. He closed the notebook. The sound was quiet, but it had the finality of a gavel strike. This is a sick joke, Marcus repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. He was looking at Julian Croft, searching for some sign that this was an elaborate corporate prank. Julian simply shook his head slowly. It's no joke, Marcus. I have worked for Mr. Vance for 12 years. He founded this firm from his college dorm room with $1,000 and a proprietary algorithm. His preference for anonymity has been his greatest asset, until today. The truth, stark and undeniable, finally broke through Marcus's defenses. His face, which had been red with anger, was now pale with terror. He understood. The power he had been courting, the power he had been boasting about, was sitting across from him, wearing the face of the man he had despised and dismissed. Seraphina finally found her voice. It was a choked, desperate whisper. Elias, I didn't know. That's the point, Seraphina, Elias said, his gaze locking with hers. There was no anger in his eyes, only a vast, empty disappointment. You didn't know, and you didn't care to. You didn't see a man in crisis. You saw a broken appliance. You didn't ask how you could help. You asked, "What about my allowance?" He let her own words hang in the air between them, a permanent, damning indictment. He had held them in for weeks, and now, spoken aloud in this silent, horrified room, they revealed the full, shallow depth of her character. "The man you thought was a failure," Elias continued, his voice hardening slightly, "the man you were embarrassed to be seen with, has been spending the last 6 months orchestrating the single largest strategic acquisition of his career." He gestured vaguely at the papers on the table. This deal, the Meridian Plaza, was to be the final piece. Marcus's eyes widened, a flicker of desperate hope in them. So the deal is still on? Elias, my boy, I misjudged you. I see that now. A brilliant strategy, testing us, keeping your power hidden, killer instinct. You have it in spades. The sudden, sycophantic reversal was so grotesque, so transparent, it was pathetic. Elias looked at him with cold disdain. "The deal," he said, his voice dropping to an icy calm, "is off. Vance Strategic Holdings is withdrawing its offer, effective immediately." The gasp from Marcus was a wounded, guttural sound. "No, no, you can't. We've made announcements. Our stock, our financing is all tied to this. It would ruin us." "Ruin is a strong word, Marcus," Elias said, "but also, perhaps, an accurate one. Which brings me to the second item on today's agenda." He looked at Julian, who opened his leather briefcase and slid a thick, bound document across the polished table towards Marcus. "As of Wednesday at noon," Elias explained calmly, "Project Nightingale was completed. Over the past 6 months, a subsidiary of Vance Strategic Holdings has quietly and legally acquired a controlling interest in the primary commercial lender for Hayes Corporation. That document is a formal notice. We are calling in your entire debt portfolio. You have 90 days to repay $275 million, plus interest." The room fell silent once more. This was not just the withdrawal of a deal. This was a death sentence. Hayes Corp didn't have that kind of liquid capital. No one did. They were leveraged to the hilt for the Meridian Plaza project. Calling in their debt would trigger a cascade of defaults that would utterly bankrupt the company and the family. Marcus stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. His hands trembled. He looked up at Elias, his face a mask of utter devastation. The titan of industry was gone. In his place was a terrified old man. Serafina finally broke. She shot up from her chair, her face streaked with tears. "Elias, no, please. You can't do this. Think of everything. Think of us." She started to move around the table towards him, her hands outstretched in a desperate plea. "Us?" Elias said, the word flat and dead. He stood up, meeting her halfway. She reached for his arm, and for the first time, he physically recoiled, pulling his arm away as if from a fire. The small, sharp movement was more final than any word. "There is no us, Serafina," he said, his voice low and firm, for her alone. "You made that clear on Tuesday. This isn't personal, it's business. Your family taught me that. This is just an arrangement, and the terms have changed." He looked at her, his eyes holding no warmth, no pity, no lingering affection. "I believe you have a deadline to meet. It's Friday. You have 4 more days. But I think it's best we consider this our end. I'll have your things sent from the apartment. Please leave the key with the doorman." He turned his back on her, a gesture of absolute finality, and faced the rest of the silent, shattered room. The aftermath in the boardroom was a scene of quiet, desperate implosion. Marcus Hayes, the blustering patriarch, had collapsed into his chair, his face gray. He stared at the debt notice on the table, his empire turning to ash before his very eyes. Eleanor was trying to comfort him, her own face a mess of tears and disbelief, her quiet world of garden parties and charity luncheons dissolving. Serafina stood frozen where Elias had left her, halfway down the table. Her desperate plea had been met with a wall of cold, unassailable logic. He had used her own transactional view of their relationship as a shield against her emotional appeal. The shock on her face was slowly being replaced by the horrifying calculus of her loss. It wasn't just Elias the man she had lost. She had lost access to a level of wealth and power she couldn't have even imagined. She had traded a king for a pawn, and now the king had checkmated her entire world. "Elias, please," Marcus finally managed to say, his voice a frail, broken version of his usual boom. "Don't do this. There must be another way. We can renegotiate anything, just don't destroy me." Elias looked at the man who had so casually tried to destroy his dignity. He felt no satisfaction, no thrill of victory, only a profound, weary sense of justice being served. "Destruction is not my goal, Marcus," Elias said, his voice even. "Accountability is. You built an empire on leverage and arrogance. You treated people, including your own family, like assets on a balance sheet. This is simply a market correction." He turned to Julian. "Mr. Croft will be handling the particulars of the debt restructuring. We are not interested in forcing Hayes Corp into bankruptcy. That would be untidy. We will, however, be assuming a controlling interest in the company in exchange for a cancellation of the immediate debt call. You will be allowed to retain a title, Marcus, a nominal one, but your authority will be gone. The board will be replaced, and large portions of the company's assets will be sold off to restore fiscal stability." It was a fate worse than bankruptcy for a man like Marcus. He would not be ruined, but he would be neutered. He would be forced to watch from the sidelines as the empire he built was dismantled and remade by the man he had scorned. He would keep a semblance of his wealth, but he would lose the one thing he truly valued: his power. Serafina made one last, desperate attempt. "My things, from the apartment?" she whispered, as if just processing that part of his declaration. "Elias, that's my home." "No, Serafina," Elias corrected her gently. "It was my home. You were simply living in it, just as I was living in your life. It was, as you said, an arrangement, and the lease is up." He gave a final, curt nod to Julian, a silent signal that his part in this was over. He turned and walked towards the door, his posture erect, his stride confident. He did not look back at the wreckage of the Hayes family. He did not need to. The image of their shattered arrogance was permanently etched in his mind. As he reached the door, he heard Serafina call his name one last time, her voice raw with a pain that, for the first time, sounded genuine. "Elias!" He stopped, his hand on the door, but he did not turn around. "Why?" she cried, the question hanging in the silent room. "Why go through all of this? The lies, the humiliation? Why not just leave?" Elias paused for a long moment, considering the question. He thought about the weeks of condescension, the casual cruelty, the profound disrespect. He could have just walked away, but that would have been too easy. It would have left their arrogance intact, their worldview unchallenged. They would have dismissed him as a failure and moved on, never learning the lesson. "Because," Elias said, his back still to her, his voice resonating with a cold, clear truth. "You don't cure a disease by ignoring the symptoms. You expose it to the light. You needed to see yourselves for what you truly are. Now you can." With that, he opened the door and walked out, closing it softly behind him. He left behind a world of shattered illusions and brutal consequences, stepping back into the clean, clear air of his own reality. The performance was over. The accounts were settled, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt truly, completely free. The months that followed were a period of profound and quiet transformation for all involved. Elias Vance, true to his word, did not destroy the Hayes family. He simply restructured them. Under Julian Croft's meticulous supervision, Vance Strategic Holdings took control of Hayes Corp. The company was streamlined, its excesses trimmed, its culture of arrogance replaced with one of quiet competence. Large, flashy assets were sold off, including the corporate jet, the box at the stadium, and the naming rights to a new arts pavilion. The company survived, and in time even stabilized, but it was a shadow of its former, swaggering self. Marcus Hayes was given the title of Chairman Emeritus, a gilded cage that came with an office but no power. He was a ghost in his own building, a walking cautionary tale. His health declined, the fire in his belly extinguished, leaving behind a bitter, defeated old man. He and Eleanor were forced to sell the Belmont mansion to cover personal debts, downsizing to a respectable but far less ostentatious home in the suburbs. Their social standing evaporated. The phone calls stopped. The invitations dried up. They were no longer players. They were simply spectators. Seraphina's fate was perhaps the most poignant. Her option, Tristan Allister, disappeared the moment the news of Hayes Corp's fall from grace became public. His interest in her had been as transactional as her interest in Elias. Stripped of the financial and social power of her family name, she was no longer a desirable asset. Elias had her belongings professionally packed and moved to a storage unit, the first 3 months paid in advance. He left the key and the storage agreement with the doorman at the penthouse. He never heard from her directly again. He heard whispers through Julian and others. She tried to leverage her social connections, but they were fair-weather friends. She tried to launch a career as a lifestyle influencer, but her brand was now tainted by failure. She was forced to get a real job, something she hadn't had to do since college. The last he heard, she was working as a sales associate in a high-end boutique, a place she used to shop in, now a place she worked in, selling the dream she could no longer afford. She was surrounded by the symbols of the life she had lost, a daily grinding reminder of what she had thrown away. Elias, meanwhile, stepped out from the shadows, but only slightly. The story of the Hayes Corp takeover became a legend in the financial world, a quiet earthquake that had reordered the landscape. The name Elias Vance was now spoken with a new level of awe and respect, but he remained intensely private. He moved out of the penthouse, which had become a museum of a life he no longer wanted. He bought a quiet, elegant brownstone on a tree-lined street, a home that was comfortable and beautiful, but not ostentatious. One crisp autumn evening, 6 months after the boardroom confrontation, Julian Croft came over for dinner. Elias was in the kitchen, cooking. It was a complex dish this time, a coq au vin that had been simmering for hours, filling the house with a rich, savory aroma. "You seem happier," Julian noted, leaning against the doorframe, a glass of wine in his hand. "More at peace." "I am," Elias said, stirring the pot. "I feel lighter. For years I was hiding my success, worried it would attract the wrong kind of people. Then I found out it already had. The money was a mask. It hid my true self, but it also hid theirs." "You were ruthless, you know," Julian said, his tone one of professional admiration. "The way you used their own arrogance against them, it was a masterstroke." "It wasn't about being ruthless," Elias corrected him, turning down the heat. "It was about being clear. They live in a world of surfaces, of appearances. I had to hold up a mirror to them that was so clear, so undeniable, they couldn't look away. They had to see the truth of their own values." "And Seraphina?" Julian asked gently. Elias paused his stirring. He looked out the kitchen window into his small, quiet garden. "I hope she finds her way," he said, his voice sincere. "I hope one day she learns that a person's worth isn't determined by their bank balance or their social standing. It's measured by their character, their integrity, their capacity for loyalty when it's tested. That's the real portfolio. That's the only one that accrues value over a lifetime." He had maintained his moral high ground. He had not become cruel or vindictive. He had simply enacted a perfect, poetic justice, where the consequences were a direct reflection of the transgressions. The Hayes family had valued wealth over character, So they lost the status that wealth provided. Serafina had seen him as a provider, not a partner, so she was left with neither. Later that night, after Julian had left, Elias sat in his library, a warm fire crackling in the hearth. He picked up the small, worn leather notebook from his desk. He flipped through the pages, the coded entries that chronicled a season of deception and revelation. He stopped at the last stark entry. Hayes Corp., final assessment, unsentimental liquidation. He looked at it for a long moment, then he closed the book. He stood up, walked over to the fireplace, and tossed the notebook into the flames. He watched as the fire consumed the leather, the pages curling and turning to black ash. The record was gone. The test was over. The lesson had been learned. He was no longer the underestimated hero hiding in the shadows. He was just Elias Vance. And for the first time, that was more than enough. The story of Elias and the Hayes family serves as a powerful reminder for all of us. It teaches us that true strength is often quiet, and that a person's real value is only ever revealed when the chips are down. It's a lesson about integrity, patience, and the undeniable truth that what we are is so much more important than what we have. What do you think? Was Elias's plan a brilliant act of justice, or was it a cold, calculated revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you found this story of vindication as satisfying as we did, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that character is the only currency that truly matters. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.